The massive space station Nexus Prime floated in the void between star systems like a metal city among the stars. Its huge circular structure spun slowly, creating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings who lived and worked inside. 12 different alien species called this place home, and each one brought their own technology, culture, and problems. Ben Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead as he knelt beside a massive power coupling on level 7. The human construction foreman had been working for 6 straight hours, but he showed no signs of stopping. His team of 20 humans moved around him like a well-oiled machine, each person knowing exactly what to do without needing orders. "Hand me the quantum wrench," Ben said to his assistant, Maria. She passed him the tool without looking up from her own work. They had been doing this job for 3 months now, and every day brought new challenges. The power systems on Nexus Prime were failing. Not quickly, but steadily, like a slow leak in a ship's hull. The station had been built 50 years ago using old technology from the Galactic Council. Back then, it worked fine for the 5 species who lived there. But as more alien races joined the community, their different energy needs put strain on the original design. Now the station housed 12 species, each with unique requirements. The methane-breathing Vorthal needed temperature controls set to -40 degrees. The crystal-based Shinari required specific light frequencies to survive. The aquatic deeplings needed water circulation systems that never stopped running. Every species demanded power, and the old reactors simply could not keep up. That was where Ben's team came in. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy for being excellent engineers. Not because they were the smartest or had the best technology, but because they could make anything work. Other species designed perfect systems for perfect conditions. Humans designed systems that worked even when everything went wrong. "The coupling is stable now," Ben announced, standing up and stretching his back. "Maria, run a diagnostic check on the power flow. I want to see the numbers before we move to the next section." Around them, the engineering bay hummed with activity. Sparks flew from welding torches as humans worked to install new power conduits. The air smelled of metal and ozone from the electrical work. Computer screens showed endless streams of data as the team monitored every system on the station. Ben walked over to his main workstation and pulled up the station's power grid on his holographic display. The three-dimensional image showed the entire structure of Nexus Prime, with colored lines representing different power systems. Red areas showed where the old systems were failing. Yellow areas needed attention soon. Green areas were working properly. There was still too much red on the display for Ben's liking. "How long until the next critical system failure?" asked Tom, Ben's second-in-command. Tom was a thin man with gray hair who had been working construction in space for 30 years. Ben studied the data carefully. "If we keep working at this pace, we might finish the core upgrades in 2 weeks. But some systems won't last that long. The life support for Section C is already showing stress fractures. The deepling water recyclers are running at 98% capacity. And the main reactor is throwing error codes every few hours." Tom shook his head. 2 weeks feels like forever when you're looking at those numbers. "That's why we don't stop working," Ben said simply. "Every hour we save could mean the difference between life and death for someone on this station." The engineering bay's main door slid open with a soft hiss. Ben looked up, expecting to see another human worker returning from break. Instead, he saw a group of aliens entering the restricted area. The leader was clearly from the Zelrani Empire. Ben recognized the species immediately from their tall, elegant builds and their skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. This particular Zelrani looked young, probably barely an adult by their standards. His skin showed patches of bright gold, which Ben knew meant arrogance and superiority. The alien wore expensive robes decorated with precious metals and gems that probably cost more than Ben's entire salary. Behind the young Zelrani came 4 guards, also from the same species but with much more subdued clothing and neutral skin colors. They carried advanced energy weapons and walked with the disciplined movements of professional soldiers. Ben had never seen this particular group before, but he could guess who they were. Word had been spreading through the station that some important Zelrani noble was coming to inspect the diplomatic facilities. Apparently, that inspection now included the engineering sections. "Excuse me," Ben said, approaching the group politely. "This is a restricted work area. If you need to inspect our progress, I can arrange a tour of the completed sections, but we can't have unauthorized personnel in active construction zones." The young Zelrani turned to look at Ben, and his skin shifted to an even brighter gold color. When he spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. "I am Crix Vorthak, heir to the Zelrani Empire's Fourth Fleet," the alien announced. "I go where I please, and I certainly don't need permission from a human." Ben kept his expression neutral. He had dealt with difficult aliens before, and he knew that getting angry would only make things worse. "I understand you're important, sir, but safety regulations apply to everyone on this station. There are live electrical systems and heavy machinery operating in this area." Crix laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing. "Safety regulations? From humans?" He turned to his guards as if Ben wasn't even there. "Did you hear that? The primitive species is concerned about our safety." Ben felt his jaw tighten slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "Sir, I'm just trying to do my job and keep everyone safe. If you want to see our work, I can show you the completed sections where there's no danger." "Your job?" Crix stepped closer to Ben, his skin now flashing with orange streaks of contempt. "Your job is to do whatever your superiors tell you to do. And right now, I am your superior." Around the engineering bay, Ben's team had stopped working. 20 human faces turned toward the confrontation, and Ben could see anger building in their expressions. Maria had put down her tools and was watching with narrowed eyes. Tom had moved closer, ready to back up his foreman if things got worse. Ben raised one hand slightly, a gesture his team understood. It meant stay calm and let him handle this. "I respect your position," Ben said carefully. "But my responsibility is to the safety of this station and everyone on it. That includes you and your guards." Crix's skin shifted to deeper orange with red streaks now visible. "Responsibility? From a human?" He turned in a slow circle, speaking to his guards but clearly intending for everyone to hear. "Do you know what humans are? They're barely evolved primates who discovered fire yesterday. Their home planet is a mess of pollution and violence. They fight each other over pieces of dirt and chunks of metal." Ben said nothing, but his team was getting angrier. He could see Maria's hands clenching into fists. Tom had taken another step forward. Several other workers had completely abandoned their tasks and were staring at the Zelrani with obvious hostility. "Humans think they're engineers," Crix continued, warming up to his subject. "But look at this place. Look at these primitive tools and crude methods. A proper Zelrani engineering team could have finished this work in a week using advanced technology. Instead, the Galactic Council hired these evolutionary mistakes to crawl around in the dirt like the animals they are." Ben's team was getting really angry now. The Zelrani guards had noticed the humans' hostile expressions and were shifting their positions slightly, hands moving closer to their weapons. The situation was getting dangerous fast. "The only reason humans are here at all," Crix said, now speaking directly to Ben, "is because they work cheap. Quantity over quality. Throw enough primitive labor at a problem and eventually something might get fixed. That's the human way, isn't it?" Ben could feel his team's anger like heat from a fire. These were good people, skilled workers who had spent months of their lives trying to save this station. They were tired, stressed, and far from home, and now some spoiled alien kid was calling them animals and evolutionary mistakes. The worst part was that Ben knew Crix was trying to provoke exactly this kind of reaction. The young alien wanted the humans to get angry, to say something stupid or maybe even start a fight. Then he could report back to his superiors that humans were violent and uncontrolled, unfit for important work. "But you know what I think is the most pathetic thing about humans? Crix asked, stepping even closer to Ben. You have no pride. No dignity. Other species stand up for themselves when insulted. But humans? You just take whatever anyone wants to dish out because you know you're inferior. Ben looked at Crix for a long moment. The alien's skin was now mostly red and orange, colors that meant anger and contempt among the Zelrani. His guards looked nervous, clearly not comfortable with how far this confrontation had escalated. Around the engineering bay, Ben's team waited to see how their leader would respond. Ben could have pointed out that humans had built some of the most impressive structures in known space. He could have mentioned that human engineers were requested by name for the most difficult projects throughout the galaxy. He could have reminded Crix that without human work, this station would be dead within a month. He could have explained that the primitive methods Crix mocked were actually more reliable than the advanced Zelrani technology that broke down when conditions weren't perfect. He could have noted that human systems were designed to be repaired and maintained, while Zelrani technology had to be completely replaced when it failed. Ben could have said all of that. His team expected him to say it. The watching aliens from other species who had gathered to see what was happening probably expected it too. Instead, Ben set down his tools on the nearest workbench. He wiped his hands on his work clothes and looked at Crix one more time. Then he nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that he had heard everything the alien said. Without speaking a single word, Ben turned and walked toward the exit. His team stared in shock. Maria's mouth fell open. Tom looked like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The other workers exchanged confused glances, not sure what to do. Ben. Maria called after him. Where are you going? Ben paused at the doorway and looked back at his team. Break time, he said simply. 15 minutes. Then he walked out, leaving behind a room full of confused humans, surprised aliens, and one very pleased young Zelrani noble. Crix laughed triumphantly, his skin shifting to bright gold again. Did you see that? He called to his guards. I told you humans have no backbone. Look at their great leader, running away like a scared child. The human workers began filing out after Ben, their faces showing mixtures of confusion, anger, and disappointment. They had wanted their foreman to fight back, to defend their species and their work. Instead, he had just walked away without saying anything. As the engineering bay emptied, Crix turned to the aliens from other species who had gathered to watch the confrontation. There were several deeplings with their blue-green skin and gill slits, a few crystal-bodied Shinari that glowed with internal light, and 2 massive Gorthak traders with their thick armor-like hides. You all saw it, Crix announced to the crowd. This is what humans are really like. Cowards who run away the moment someone challenges them. And these are the beings the Galactic Council trusts with critical infrastructure. The other aliens said nothing, but many of them looked thoughtful. Some seemed surprised by Ben's reaction, while others appeared to be drawing their own conclusions about what they had witnessed. News of the confrontation spread quickly through Nexus Prime's communication networks. Within an hour, beings throughout the station knew that the human engineering foreman had been publicly humiliated by a young Zelrani noble and had walked away without defending himself or his species. Some aliens shook their heads in disappointment. Others felt sorry for the humans. A few wondered if they had made a mistake trusting such important work to a species that wouldn't even stand up for itself. But Ben Rodriguez was not thinking about any of that. He was in his private quarters, studying power consumption reports and trying to figure out how to buy his team the time they needed to finish their work before the station's failing systems killed everyone on board. 3 days passed after the confrontation between Ben and Crix Vorthak. The story had spread throughout every level of Nexus Prime, growing bigger with each telling. Some versions claimed Ben had actually run away crying. Others said he had been so scared that he couldn't speak. The Zelrani delegation seemed particularly pleased with how the incident reflected on human courage and leadership. Ben continued his work as if nothing had happened. Every morning, he arrived at the engineering bay at exactly 700 hours station time. His team followed his example, focusing on their tasks with quiet determination. They installed new power couplings, upgraded circuit boards, and ran endless diagnostic tests on the station's failing systems. But something had changed in the way other species looked at the human workers. Ben noticed fewer friendly greetings in the corridors. Alien merchants who used to chat about their families now gave polite nods and kept walking. Even the station's maintenance staff seemed less willing to help when the humans needed access to restricted areas. The humans felt the change too. Maria mentioned that her favorite coffee shop had started serving her with cold efficiency instead of the warm conversations she used to enjoy. Tom reported that alien engineers from other species no longer asked for his advice on technical problems. "They think we're cowards," said Rodriguez, one of the younger team members, during their morning briefing. "Maybe we should have said something back to that Zelrani kid." Ben looked up from his work schedule. "And what would that have accomplished?" "At least we would have stood up for ourselves," Rodriguez replied. "Now everyone thinks humans are weak." "What people think doesn't change the laws of physics," Ben said calmly. "Our job is to keep this station running, not to win popularity contests." Tom nodded in agreement. "Ben's right. We have real problems to solve. The reactor temperature has been fluctuating more each day. Section C's life support is operating beyond safe limits. And the power distribution system is showing stress fractures in 17 different locations." Ben pulled up the station's status display on the main holographic projector. The three-dimensional image showed Nexus Prime in all its complex detail, but now there were more red warning indicators than ever before. Critical systems throughout the massive structure were failing faster than originally predicted. "How much time do we have?" asked Maria. Ben studied the data carefully. "Best case scenario, if nothing else goes wrong, maybe 5 days before we start losing life support in populated areas. Worst case scenario, if we get a cascade failure in the main reactor, maybe 12 hours. The team absorbed this information in silence. They had all known the situation was serious, but seeing the numbers made it real in a way that was both frightening and motivating. "What's our priority?" asked Tom. "Keep working," Ben said simply. "We focus on the most critical systems first. Everything else is secondary." As the days continued, Ben's team worked with increasing urgency. They knew that every hour mattered, every small improvement could mean the difference between life and death for thousands of beings throughout the station. Meanwhile, the Zelrani delegation continued their inspection tour of Nexus Prime's facilities. Krix Vorthak seemed particularly pleased with his treatment by the station's administrators, who were clearly eager to impress such an important visitor. He attended formal dinners, toured the diplomatic quarters, and gave interviews to the station's news services about Zelrani technology and culture. In one particularly widely broadcast interview, Crick spoke about his encounter with the human engineering team. "It perfectly demonstrated what I've been saying about human limitations," he told the interviewer, a nervous deepling named Cole Wavecrest. "When faced with any real challenge, they simply run away. This is not the kind of species you want handling critical infrastructure." Cole shifted uncomfortably in his water-filled interview chair. "But surely the humans were brought here because of their engineering expertise?" "Expertise?" Crix laughed. "They're using tools and methods that are 50 years out of date. Any proper Zelrani engineering team could complete their work in a fraction of the time using advanced technology. Perhaps you could demonstrate this?" Cole suggested. "Your father did bring a technical team with the delegation." Crix's skin shifted to confident gold tones. "An excellent idea. I'll speak to my father about arranging a proper demonstration of Zelrani engineering capabilities." The interview was broadcast throughout the station and even transmitted to nearby systems. Within hours, it had become a topic of discussion in every common area, restaurant, and workplace on Nexus Prime. Ben learned about the interview when Tom brought him a data pad during lunch break. They were eating in the engineering bay, as usual, sharing simple food while reviewing work schedules and technical specifications. "Have you seen this?" Tom asked, showing Ben the interview transcript. Ben read it quickly, his expression not changing. Young Crick certainly has confidence in his people's abilities. Doesn't it bother you? Asked Maria, who had been listening. He's basically saying we're incompetent. People can say whatever they want, Ben replied. Results speak louder than words. That afternoon brought the crisis everyone had been dreading but hoping to avoid. Ben was installing a new power coupling in Section D when alarms began sounding throughout the station. Red warning lights flashed in every corridor, and the station's automated announcement system began broadcasting emergency messages. Attention all residents of Nexus Prime. We are experiencing a critical malfunction in the main reactor core. All non-essential personnel should report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Ben's communication device buzzed with an urgent message from Station Commander Vel Tessarian. Ben, we need your team in the main reactor chamber immediately. We have a massive containment failure. Ben and his team dropped their tools and ran through the corridors toward the reactor section. As they moved, they passed groups of aliens heading in the opposite direction, toward emergency shelters and evacuation pods. The fear on every face was obvious and completely understandable. The main reactor chamber was a massive space at the heart of Nexus Prime, filled with humming machinery and glowing energy conduits. When Ben's team arrived, they found chaos. Station Commander Vel stood in the center of the room, surrounded by alien engineers from 6 different species. The massive Gorthak was shouting orders in his deep, rumbling voice. 2 Shinari were interfacing directly with computer systems, their crystal bodies glowing brighter with stress. A group of deeplings worked frantically at control stations, their blue-green skin dark with worry. And standing to one side, looking confident despite the crisis, was Crick's Vorthak and a team of Zelrani engineers. What's the situation? Ben asked Commander Vel. The station commander's usually calm demeanor was cracking under pressure. The main containment field is failing. We're losing magnetic bottle integrity throughout the entire reactor core. If we can't stabilize it within the next few hours, we'll have complete reactor failure. Ben looked at the main display screen, which showed the reactor's status in real time. The massive fusion reactor that powered Nexus Prime was essentially a controlled star, held in place by powerful magnetic fields. Those fields were failing, and if they collapsed completely, the reactor would either shut down entirely or explode, depending on how the safety systems responded. Either outcome would mean death for everyone on the station. What caused the failure? Ben asked. We're not entirely sure, Commander Vel admitted. The containment system has been showing stress indicators for weeks, but we thought we had more time before critical failure. Crick stepped forward, his skin showing confident gold patterns. Commander, with respect, this is exactly the kind of problem that requires advanced Zelrani technology to solve. My engineering team has the most sophisticated containment field generators in known space. Commander Vel looked desperate enough to try anything. How long would it take your people to make repairs? Give us access to the reactor controls, and we can have this fixed within 2 hours, Crick said confidently. Ben said nothing, but he studied the reactor displays more carefully. Something about the failure pattern looked familiar, but he couldn't quite identify what was bothering him. Commander Vel made the decision that seemed obvious under the circumstances. Very well, Mr. Vorthak. Your team has permission to attempt repairs. Everyone else, please give the Zelrani engineers full access and cooperation. Crick smiled triumphantly and signaled to his team. 6 Zelrani engineers moved toward the reactor controls with smooth efficiency. They began connecting their advanced equipment to the station's systems, speaking to each other in rapid technical language. Ben and his team were pushed to the side, effectively dismissed from their own workplace. They watched as the Zelrani worked with impressive speed and obvious skill. Their equipment was sleek and obviously expensive, covered with displays that showed complex mathematical calculations in real time. For 30 minutes, it looked like the Zelrani approach might work. The containment field strength indicators stopped dropping and actually improved slightly. Commander Vel began to look hopeful, and several of the other alien engineers started to relax. Then everything went wrong at once. The Zelrani equipment, designed for perfect laboratory conditions, could not handle the chaotic environment of a failing reactor. Their sophisticated magnetic field generators overloaded trying to compensate for the irregular power fluctuations throughout the station. One by one, their advanced systems began shutting down to protect themselves from damage. "What's happening?" Commander Vel demanded. Crix's skin had shifted to nervous yellow tones. "There seems to be some kind of interference with our equipment. The power supply on this station is too irregular for our systems to function properly." Ben almost smiled at that. The power supply was irregular because the reactor was failing. That was the whole problem they were trying to solve. The Zelrani team worked frantically to recalibrate their equipment, but their technology simply wasn't designed to work under these conditions. Within an hour, they had to admit defeat. The containment field was failing even faster than before, and now several of their expensive devices were completely burned out. "I don't understand," Crix said, his skin showing confused orange patterns. "This equipment works perfectly under normal conditions." "These aren't normal conditions," Commander Vel said grimly. "Tom, get your people to try the Gorthak approach." The Gorthak engineers stepped forward with their massive, heavily built equipment. If the Zelrani approach was like a precision surgical instrument, the Gorthak method was like a sledgehammer. They believed in overwhelming force and redundant systems. For a while, that seemed to work too. The Gorthak engineers managed to temporarily strengthen the containment field using raw power and multiple backup systems. But their equipment was designed for their home world stable conditions, and it couldn't adapt to the complex requirements of a multi-species station. After another hour of increasingly desperate work, the Gorthak team also admitted defeat. Their approach had actually made some problems worse by overloading circuits that were already stressed. One by one, each species tried their best technological solutions. The Shinari attempted to interface directly with the reactor's computer systems, but their crystal-based processing couldn't handle the chaotic data streams from failing equipment. The Deeplings tried to reroute power through their specialized underwater engineering systems, but their technology required liquid environments that didn't exist in the reactor chamber. With each failure, the situation grew more desperate. The containment field was now fluctuating wildly, and the automated safety systems were warning that complete reactor failure was only hours away. Commander Vel looked around the room at all the defeated engineering teams. "Does anyone else have any ideas?" Ben stepped forward quietly. "Commander, may I suggest something?" Crix turned toward Ben with obvious contempt. "Seriously? We're going to listen to the human who ran away from a simple conversation." But Commander Vel was desperate enough to listen to anyone. "What do you have in mind, Ben?" "My team and I would like to try a different approach," Ben said calmly. "But we'll need complete access to the reactor controls, and we'll need everyone else to stay out of our way." "You?" Crix laughed. "With what equipment? I don't see any advanced technology that humans brought with them." Ben looked at the young Zelrani noble for a moment. "We don't need advanced technology. We need working technology." Commander Vel was running out of options and time. "Very well, Ben. Your team has full access. Everyone else, please clear the reactor chamber." As the other species filed out, many of them shaking their heads in disbelief, Ben's team moved toward the reactor controls. But instead of heading to the main control station, Ben led them toward a series of access panels along the walls. "What are you doing?" asked Maria. "Something I should have done 3 days ago," Ben replied, opening the first access panel. Inside were dozens of thick cables and circuit boards that looked completely different from the standard station equipment. Tom stared at the unfamiliar components. "Ben, what is this stuff?" "Emergency backup systems," Ben explained, beginning to connect cables with practiced efficiency. "I've been installing them throughout the station for the past 2 weeks. Independent power distribution networks that bypass the main reactor entirely." Maria's eyes widened. You mean you've been building a completely separate power grid? That's exactly what I mean, Ben said, moving to the next access panel. The main reactor was always going to fail. I've known that since we first ran the diagnostic tests. So instead of trying to fix an unfixable system, I decided to replace it. Ben's team stared at him in amazement. While they had been working on the obvious repairs, their foreman had been secretly building an entirely new power system throughout Nexus Prime. The backup generators in Section C aren't for emergencies, Ben continued, explaining as he worked. They're fusion microreactors, each one capable of powering a quarter of the station independently. The upgraded circuits we've been installing aren't improvements to the old system. They're completely new power distribution networks. Tom began to understand. That's why you've been so calm about the timeline. You knew we couldn't fix the main reactor in time, so you were building a replacement. Why didn't you tell us? Asked Rodriguez. Ben paused in his work. Because if I had told you, you would have asked questions. Questions that other people might have overheard. And if certain parties had known what we were really doing, they might have tried to stop us. Ben activated his communication device and spoke to someone in another part of the station. Maria, this is Ben. Please begin the startup sequence for Backup Grid Alpha. Throughout Nexus Prime, systems that nobody had realized were connected began coming online. In Section C, the backup generators that everyone thought were just emergency power supplies revealed themselves to be sophisticated fusion microreactors. The upgraded circuits throughout the station began carrying power from these new sources. On the main display in the reactor chamber, new indicators appeared showing power flow through systems that hadn't existed an hour earlier. The failing main reactor was still critical, but now it wasn't essential. The backup grid was carrying the load for life support, environmental controls, and all critical systems. Ben's communication device buzzed with reports from his team members stationed throughout the station. Ben, this is Sam in Section D. All systems show green on backup power. Ben, this is Lisa in Section F, life support is stable on the new grid. Ben, this is Mike in the Environmental Center. All species-specific atmospheric controls are running normally on backup power. Commander Vell's voice came through the station's communication system. Ben, what exactly have you done? I've given us time, Commander, Ben replied. The main reactor is still failing, and we still need to replace it eventually. But now we can do that work safely, without risking everyone's lives. The backup grid can keep the station running for months while we install permanent new systems. In the reactor chamber, alarms were still sounding, but they were no longer critical warnings. The main reactor was dying, but it was no longer a threat to anyone. The automated safety systems could manage its shutdown while the new power grid kept everyone alive. Ben turned to face Crix Vorthak, who had returned to the reactor chamber and was staring at the displays in shock. You built all of this in 2 weeks? Crix asked, his skin showing confused yellow and orange patterns. Actually, I started 3 months ago, Ben corrected. As soon as we ran the first diagnostics and I realized the main reactor couldn't be saved. Everything my team has been doing since then was preparation for this moment. Crix's skin shifted through several colors as he processed this information. But why didn't you say anything when I was talking about human incompetence? Why didn't you defend yourself? Ben looked at the young alien with the same calm expression he had worn 3 days earlier. Because every minute I spent arguing with you was a minute I wasn't spending on work that could save lives. You wanted me to prove that humans were strong and capable. I thought it was more important to actually be strong and capable. Commander Vell's voice crackled through the communication system again. Ben, I need a full report on these backup systems. How long can they sustain the station? Indefinitely, Commander, Ben replied. Each microreactor is designed to run for 50 years without major maintenance. The power distribution system is modular, so we can expand it as needed. And unlike the main reactor, this system was designed specifically for the multi-species requirements of Nexus Prime. As the immediate crisis passed and the reality of what Ben had accomplished became clear, word spread rapidly throughout the station. The human engineering team hadn't just fixed the problem, they had secretly built an entirely new solution while everyone else was focused on the obvious approach. Crick stood in the reactor chamber, watching the displays that showed his people's equipment being carefully removed and packed away. His advanced Zelrani technology, designed for perfect conditions, had failed when faced with real-world chaos. Meanwhile, the humans had quietly built something that worked. "I owe you an apology," Crick said finally, his skin showing subdued blue tones that indicated humility among the Zelrani. Ben looked at the young alien and nodded once, the same simple gesture he had made 3 days earlier. "Apology accepted. But next time, maybe save the speeches until after the work is finished."